Record. Gonna admit. Welcome everybody. Good afternoon. It is quarantine time. Today is actually our final quarantine time. Sort of sad, but it's exciting because we have a fantastic topic today. Today is our Brain Facts, Neuroscience, and the Vermont Brain Bee. So, what we'd like to do as we're waiting for people to join us, first of all, in the chat box, I've just entered, we have the option for closed captioning. If you need that service, just click the link that I just put into the chat box. If all of you could find the chat box yourselves, what I would love for you to do is just do a brief welcome introduction. We'd love to know your first name and where you're from. That just, one, helps us. We need to capture an accurate participant list from today. And I know a lot of your names that you come into Zoom might not be your own. So you can either, definitely introduce yourself in the chat box. But if you also know how to change your name in Zoom, do that so that the participant list reflects what your actual name is. And again, you can just put your first name if you want, your first name and where you're from, or full name. That can be your choice. And welcome, I see Emily from New Hampshire and Lexia, and our friends from Maryland have joined us today, and Underhill and Burlington. It's great that you are all joining us. So as you all are continuing to introduce yourselves, I just want to go over some of the protocols we have when we get together here in Zoom. So first of all, everybody is muted today, and we do that so that we minimize any background noise. But you would have the ability, if you want to ask a question, we can unmute you, but you'll need to raise your hand. Or you can use the chat box. So any thoughts or questions you have, put into the chat box, or raise your hand if you want to ask a question of our presenters today. We ask that you just be courteous and respectful to everyone who's here today. So what that might mean is, the chat box, use it to stay on topic. Don't go off topic. We don't want to create any distractions today. If you're on an iPad or an iPhone or some other device that you can move around, try to stay in one location, because moving around can cause distractions. So just try to stay in one spot. Make sure that you don't have anything in your background that would be inappropriate. We ask that you stay fully engaged. We have a really good presentation today. As I mentioned, today our topic is on brain facts, neuroscience, and the Vermont Brain Bee. I would be remiss if I did not also promote tomorrow. We have a science cafe, virtual science cafe, also related to brain facts. It's going to be your brain's nightlife, the neuroscience of sleep and dreams. If you are available tomorrow at 3 o'clock and you just want some more neuroscience and learn some more, go to the link that's listed, uvm.edu/extension/youth/announcements. And it's listed under the quarantine virtual science cafes. You can register there. And I know tomorrow's cafe is going to be just as interesting and exciting as today's. So I'd like to introduce our presenters. We have a nice panel of folks who are heavily involved in the Brain Bee. So I just want to give a brief introduction to them. We have Lisa Bernardin, who is a Middlebury, Vermont resident for 20 years. She's an avid outdoors woman, a kale connoisseur, and is passionate about neuroscience. She is a traumatic brain injury survivor and became the coordinator of the Vermont Brain Bee in 2010 because of her fascination with the brain. She has a master's in communication, science, and disorders from the University of Vermont. While raising her 2 daughters in the Green Mountains, she's worked for many years as a speech-language pathologist, a substitute teacher of all grades, and spend winter hours as a Nordic ski instructor at the Reichert Nordic Center. She loves volunteering for the Vermont Brain Bee and getting high school students excited to learn about their fascinating brains. And with Lisa today, we have Theresa Christiansen, who is currently a junior at Mount Mansfield Union High School. She's been fascinated with neuroscience and the inner workings of the brain from a young age. And while pursuing this interest, she started a Brain Bee chapter at her school. This past February, she won the Vermont Brain Bee. And because of COVID-19, she's gonna have to wait a year to travel to the National Brain Bee. But in 2021, she'll be going to the National Brain Bee, and we'll all be rooting for her. We also have Trey Michael, who is the president of the Neuroscience Club at South Burlington High School. He placed third in the 2020 Vermont Brain Bee, and after high school, he wishes to pursue a degree in neuroscience and later work in applied medicine. We also have Aidan May. Aidan graduated from Mount Abraham Union High School back in 2018. He was involved in the Vermont Brain Bee and his high school brain club throughout his high school career. He actually won the event in 2017 and competed at nationals in Baltimore, Maryland. Today, he's a rising junior at the University of Vermont, where he studies biochemistry and is involved in research. And last, not least though, just last on my list is Kameron Clayton. Kameron grew up in Heinsberg and attended CVU, where he participated in the first Vermont Brain Bee before going on to pursue degrees in music performance and neuroscience at Boston University. Kameron now researches the neuroscience of how we hear as a PhD candidate and a National Science Foundation graduate research fellow at Harvard University. So I would like to welcome all of our guests today. Thank you for coming today to tell us all about the brain, neuroscience, and this really cool thing called the Vermont Brain Bee. So I'm gonna turn it over to you guys. And for those of you who may have joined a little late, please introduce yourself into the chat box, your name, where you're from. And I'm gonna paste one more time, if I can. If you need the closed captioning, I will get that back in there if you need it. But I'm going to turn it over to our presenters at this point. Lisa, you're up first.
Yes, so you can hear me. I don't have to do anything. I believe that Trey is here, and I don't know if he should be with the 4 others.
Well, he is. You just can't see him, but just go ahead and start the presentation.
Okay, great. Okay, hi there, and I'm so glad you've all come today. We have some pretty dynamic information to share with you. But I'll tell you that I started the Brain Bee 11 years ago in 2010. And for the past 12 or so years, I've been pretty involved with neuroscience. However, when I was your age in middle and high school, I was very little, I was not interested in sciences very much at all, or like the brain or the nervous system. However, my interest was sparked by an accident, a real life accident. So do you have the slide? Could I have slide 3, please? Okay, so shows down there that in 1985, 35 years ago, I was in a major car accident, and I sustained significant brain trauma that affected my executive functioning. I had difficulties with problem solving, decision making, and organizational skills. So if you look on the next slide, you'll see a picture of a healthy brain on the left and an injured brain with a bifrontal contusion. And that is not a slide of my brain, but it is probably similar to what my brain looked like in that I had a bifrontal contusion, and contusion means swelling And so that is pretty much what it probably looked like. So my brain had changed, and I was perplexed by the differences in my behavior and wanted to learn more. They didn't know about neuroplasticity then, and I was supposed to accept my condition. However, I wasn't really happy with that. So, slide 5, please. Yes. And now it was 20 years later, in 2005, that I read a book, Phineas Gage. Yes, please, thank you. And you can sort of read along as I talk to you about him, but he is the biography of a man who had a hole in his head. He was a railroad employee, and by accident, for some reason, the pole went through his head. And he lived, but he was a different man. And reading this book, it describes very clearly the dramatic history of his accident and of brain science up until that point. But because of his bizarre behavior, scientists begin to realize that there's a lot of behavior and actions that come from the brain, and they really started looking at the brain in a different way. Next slide, please. So the important part, well, actually, can we go back to, well, we don't have to go back to it, but I did want to explain what I learned in Phineas Gage, which was very important to me at that time, because previous to that, I was told I had 2 years to make as many changes as I could, and then that was going to be it. And now there's plasticity. Now they know about plasticity, so that you can always keep growing and learning. But Phineas Gage opened the door to so many people, because I read that, hey, what my problem was. And before then, no one had told me that, hey, it was the frontal lobe that housed the executive functioning, which housed my problems, problem solving and disorganization and making decisions, all which I couldn't make. So anyway, we have our first poll, which is, what age group is the brain most vulnerable to the impact of a TBI, which includes mild TBI and concussions. So I know that some of you are familiar with that. But anyway, what do you think would be your choice?
So I'm going to launch the poll right now. Your choices are 2 to 10 years old, 11 to 20 years old, 20 to 30 years old, or all of the above. So hopefully you see the poll. Take it. If for some reason you can't see this, just put your answer in the chat box. We'll give it about another 30 seconds. Try to make a choice. Some of you have. So it looks like most are saying all of the above. Are they right?
They are correct. Because we should know that the brains don't completely get, wait a minute, the brains aren't fully developed until 25 years or more. Sometimes it's 27. The latest is 24 for women and 27 for men. But it's not sure, it's different for everybody. Okay, so I have another poll. Actually, it's similar to this. Do we want to do that?
Yep,
Okay.
so there you go. Why don't you read the question and then I'll launch the poll.
So I still have the results. I am trying to get rid of.
Yeah, just click the X at the top.
Yes. So accidents happen, but there are good habits that can improve your chances of a better recovery. Health, diet, exercise, and good sleep. B, limit stress, no drugs, exercise. C, exercise, meditation, no illicit drugs, healthy diet, good sleep. Or D, meditation, no illicit drugs, and good sleep.
And I just launched the poll, so think about which one you think it is, and we'll see if you're right.
Yes, and it looks like,
well, we'll give it a few more minutes, just another few more seconds, see if anybody else wants to vote in, because we have more than 6 people with us today. Why don't you guys give it a thought, see what you think. But it does look like C is winning out by far. Are they right?
they are right. They are right. They are all healthy brain habits, which really helps. And I really wanted to include this slide because I feel that this helped me out a lot because I was into all of those behaviors before my accident. And I was able to recover from a very serious TBI and be able, in 2 years, was back to working and doing what normal people can be doing. So I know our time is limited, so I want to keep going and telling you now, if we can move on to the next slide. Which shows, okay. So this is just sort of a space holder for me, or, and I'll just tell you that through, okay, so it was through the Brain Injury Quarterly magazine, because of my head injury, I received these, and it was in September of 2009 that I found out about the international, national, and chapter Brain Bees for high school students. And at that time, there were about 35 Brain Bee chapters around the country. Now there are more than 60. So the number has grown. At that time, I had 2 daughters who were in high school, and it made me realize that I checked into the fact, was there a Brain Bee in Vermont? And there wasn't. And I thought, okay, there are smart kids in Vermont. So, and high school kids are a perfect age because their brains aren't fully developed yet. So it would be great for them to learn some of those important things that happen and are controlled by the brain. So to have a brain bee, I needed 2 things, and that was I needed the support of neuroscientists in the judging process. And I needed at least 3 high schools to participate in the event. Well, my search led to realizing I lived in Middlebury. Middlebury College has a neuroscience program, undergraduates, but it doesn't have what they had at University of Vermont, which was a graduate program, an excellent graduate program, and a medical school. So I was able to find excited graduate students and neuroscientists who were eager to bring this goal of mine to fruition. And it took a while, but I secured participation from 3 high schools: Champlain Valley Union, Middlebury Union, and Mount Abraham Union. And on February 13th, 2010, we held the first ever Vermont Brain Bee. So I was very proud of myself for having all of this sort of fall into place. So it was cool. But anyway, since then, we've had 10 other successful Brain Bees. And we usually have 7 to 10 high schools, although there was a total of 17 so far out of the state that has like 100 or more high schools. So we're always eager. And over the past 11 years, we have 35 to 50 student participants that come to each Brain Bee, and we've reached about 380 students who have participated in the Vermont Brain Bee. And many of those students participate in neuroscience clubs that are created by students who want to share their learning about the brain with others. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that from Trey, I believe. And so this worthy event has shown that many of these students choose neuroscience as a career. And we're going to learn about that from Kameron. But our ambition is to reach more students in more rural parts of the state so that they too can participate in this exceptional and exciting educational program that has an impact on each of their futures in science. And this event is free. Well, it's free, yes, but we have some great volunteers through our committee and other neuroscientists and UVM grad students and undergrad students. So I could say a lot more, but I'm going to pass it on to the alums that we have. And the first one to speak will be Theresa. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Theresa. As Lauren mentioned, I've participated in the Brain Bee, and I did win it this past February. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the format of the Brain Bee and also why learning about neuroscience and participating in the Brain Bee is useful to you no matter your interests. So the Brain Bee itself is a neuroscience competition for high schoolers, but it's not just like regurgitating random facts that you learn. It's a really dynamic experience that provides a lot of different things to do. So in terms of the format, there's a lot of different sections. There's like a written section, which is the more traditional, like filling in a test about facts that you've learned. But what's really cool about it is the practical section, where you get access to actual specimens of brains with the UVM lab. And on the next slide, we can see a couple images of the kind of specimens you might have access to. And based on those specimens, you'll talk about neuroanatomy and identify parts of the brain. And this is a really unique experience that you probably won't be able to get any other place. And I certainly think it's absolutely amazing to be able to look at these specimens, to be able to look at a brain or hold it in your hands and realize like this one little organ is responsible for all of our perception. It's responsible for so much, and we have the ability to learn from it and learn about it. And that's really incredible. Another cool thing that the Brain Bee has is case presentations, which I think our alums will talk a little bit more about later, but essentially you get into more of the medical diagnostic side of neuroscience and get to work with how you might diagnose people with various neurological disorders like ADHD or Alzheimer's or anything like that. And also, one other cool thing that the Brain Bee has is a lot of interaction with grad students and neuroscientists and all of these amazing, intelligent people who you can get in contact with and learn a lot more about neuroscience from it. We have speakers that are experts in their field. I think the speaker this year is going to talk to us a bit about the neuroscience in the gut. I think Lisa might mention a little bit more about that at the end, but it's a very cool experience. And then on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why neuroscience as a whole is so cool to study. So as I mentioned, like the human brain is kind of just like a fundamental science in the sense that like your brain is the way you filter the entire world. It's your entire perspective. Everything you see, you hear, every emotion you feel, while it seems like it's the world around you, it's also filtered through your brain. And you have the ability as a scientist to understand and get to know more about that. And the really cool thing about neuroscience is it's really multidisciplinary. So you can do neuroscience that involves chemistry, that involves computer science, that involves biology, that involves psychology. There's a neuroscientific field for every interest. And then there's so many human problems of like a large variety that we can tackle with neuroscience, which I'm going to go into on the next couple of slides. So one of the first things that we can do with neuroscience is use it to make our brains smarter and better. Lisa mentioned something called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the really cool capability of your brain to be able to learn new things and strengthen the connections that it's already made. So for example, when you form a habit, you're actually strengthening the connections in your brain and that ends in you repeating that behavior. Same thing with learning a language and stuff like that. And so as we learn more about this, we can use it to learn how to make ourselves smarter, to learn how to help ourselves recover from trauma, and to learn how to help ourselves be healthier and safer. Continuing on, another really important focus of neuroscience is curing neurological disease. Alzheimer's and mental illness and Parkinson's, these are all diseases that are really complex, hard to cure, and affect lots of people. And so research with neuroscience is really integral to helping those people and making leaps and bounds in terms of medicine. So I have a really cool quick video here about how deep brain stimulation can help someone who has a tremor because of Parkinson's. So I'm going to show that really quick. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay, so we're here for the initial programming session. You got both sides.
Oh.
Okay, so we're here for the initial programming session. You got both sides of the brain put in, bilateral stimulators, and we're here for the initial programming session. This is what it looks like without the medicine and the stimulator. And now we're just going to turn it on. If I can get my fat fingers to hit the button. There we go. See how that feels. How you feel?
I feel a lot better.
Yeah. Excellent. Try tapping both your fingers for me. Excellent. All right. Feels pretty good?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. Excellent.
So yeah, and as you can see in that video, that was just an electrical stimulation to a certain part of the brain, and they were able to relieve that that tremor symptom, which is really awful, and that's just an indication of some of the amazing things that the science can do. Next slide. One other really cool thing that we can do with neuroscience is understand the different ways that different people perceive different things. For example, some people have different color vision. Some people are colorblind. Some people see color. And some people have different memory abilities. Some people have eidetic memory, which allows them to memorize really long strings of numbers and very specific information like that. And one really cool thing that some people have, it's called synesthesia, which is a blending of one or more senses. So for example, some people might see a color visually when they smell a certain smell. Or in the case of chromesthesia, which I will show in this video in a second, when somebody plays music, they actually see the notes as individual colors. So I'm going to show the video for that really quick.
My name is Caitlin Hova. I'm a software engineer, neuroscientist, and a musician. I also have synesthesia. Synesthesia is a blending of the senses. 1 in 23 people have a form of it. For me, when I hear specific musical notes, I see specific colors. And these colors are much brighter at night. What you're seeing in front of me is a lot like what I see when I hear this music. Each one of these colored lights corresponds to a particular note, and the colors are always the same.
So that's a really cool visualization of synesthesia. And as someone who's really interested in music, I think that this is a really cool facet of neuroscience that you can apply if you're interested in music or you're interested in visual perception and stuff like that. Final slide. One really booming field of neuroscience right now is using neuroscience in the application of artificial intelligence, because the human brain is the world's best supercomputer. So if we can apply the abilities of our human brain to artificial intelligence, then we can create robots that can do so much more, and that won't be fooled by those CAPTCHAs where you have to click the picture of the stop sign and the robot can't do it because the robot brain doesn't work. And we're basing things like neural networks, which are trained to see patterns, off of the way that neurons in the brain are attached to each other and communicate. As artificial intelligence improves, it's going to keep taking more cues from the interconnection of the brain, and I think that will, help advance humanity. And so what I've been sort of talking about through all of these different aims is that neuroscience is a field that can be for everyone. It's a vast field that can solve a lot of human problems and can involve so many different interests. And as high school students, the Brain Bee is a really great introduction and stepping stone for exploring a lot of these topics. So whatever your interest, whatever your interest in science, whatever your interest in other things, neuroscience can be for you, and I highly recommend trying out the Vermont Brain Bee. So I'm going to pass it off to Aidan, who's going to tell you a little bit more about his experiences.
Hi everyone, as Lauren said, my name is Aidan May. I graduated Mount Abe in 2018, and right now I'm a rising junior at UVM pursuing a Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry. We're gonna play a quick game of Kahoot. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but basically how it works is there'll be a code up on the screen if you want to pull out a smartphone if you have one, or your computer, and you're gonna type in the code and add a nickname, and then we'll get started. There are just a few fun brain questions that we want to ask you guys. Awesome. So I'll give it another maybe 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. And you should be able to enter the game even once we've started it if you want to join as well. Good to go, Kameron? Yeah, I want to start it up. So the first one is, what are the 5 tastes that we can sense? Yeah, awesome. So the correct answer was the red one: sweet, sour, bitter, savory, and salty. A fun fact about savory is another word for savory is umami, which is the Japanese word for tasty. But those are the 5 basic tastes that we can perceive inside of our mouth. So this is a true false. Our brain is made up of 100 billion cells, creating over 100 trillion connections. Awesome. Yeah, that's correct. Our brain is incredibly complex, And it's hard to even really wrap your head around how just the pure quantity and interconnectedness of all the cells in our brain. It's really amazing. So this question is, how many sections or lobes make up our brain? Yeah, so the correct answer is actually 4. So there's the frontal lobe, which is on the front of your head, the occipital lobe, which is on the side, which is responsible for auditory processes. The parietal lobe, no, sorry, the temporal lobes are on the side. Wow, it's been a couple of years since I've been tested on this. The occipital lobe in the back and the parietal kind of on top. So there are 4 basic subdivisions of the brain that we kind of imagine. This is a true false. Our brain makes up 2% of our body weight and uses a similar percentage of our total energy use. Yes, that's actually false. Our brain uses about 20% of the energy in our body. It's a pretty big energy hog. And another interesting fact is that our brain is actually really picky about the kind of energy that it likes to eat. So we can actually extract some energy from our fat cells in our body, but our brain is really picky and only prefers to eat sugar as its source of energy, which is kind of an interesting thing. And the last question, which is a true false, is the brain can be thought of as the most complex thing in the known universe. Yeah, it's true. As I mentioned, those 100 trillion connections make the brain, as far as we're concerned, the most complex thing that we know of in the universe, which is really, really amazing. So I hope you all learned a little something about the brain. I thought those were just some fun facts that you can take home from this presentation. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our neuroscience club at our high school, Mount Abraham. The picture on the right is a picture of our neuroscience club. This is my senior year. It was a really great group and a great way to prepare for the Brain Bee and learn about the brain. When I started off as a freshman at Mount Abe, we had a teacher advisor, Sam Cahart, our AP Bio teacher, had taken on the role of leading the group, and she would create presentations for us. There were like Jeopardy games that we would play. Every year, she would usually get an order of sheep brains for us to dissect as a preparation for the Brain Bee, which also had a specimen component. A few years, she actually would go to the butcher and get cow eyes, like from a freshly slaughtered cow, and we would dissect the cow eyes, which I always thought was really cool, but they were always a little bit less prepared. Specimens have a very chemically smell, but the cow eyes were not preserved, and so those are a little bit more gnarly to dissect, but it was still always a fun experiment. And yeah, that was just one fun thing that we would do in our neuroscience club. But as I became an upperclassman, Ms. Cahart kind of decided that the Brain Club felt like it was a little bit like more work than she was ready to take on, and so she tasked us, the students who had been in the club for a few years, to kind of start running it. So we would decide what we wanted to discuss in the week, whether that be drugs or neurodevelopment or adolescent brains. We could really decide on what we wanted to focus on and kind of cater that to the group. Another fun thing that we would do in our Brain Club was just invite people who maybe hadn't never learned about the brain to come in, who weren't necessarily preparing for the Brain Bee, but still really wanted to just learn something and could drop in and take away a few facts about the brain. Next slide. So well, looking back at the Brain Bee, how has the Brain Bee impacted me, and how have these experiences impacted my life? As I said, I'm not pursuing a degree in neuroscience, but it certainly has opened up a lot of doors for me and given me a lot of like soft skills, as I would say. So one thing I like to talk about is kind of the language of science. in college, you have to read a lot of peer-reviewed and primary literature, and the Brain Bee gave me a really strong foundation in neuroscience, but also just in the sciences that I might not have gotten otherwise in high school. It was a certainly more advanced level of science, and it gave me a lot more confidence in what I was reading and what I've learned about in college. Another soft skill, talking about the dissections, is I shadowed a cardiothoracic surgeon back in May because I'm interested in the healthcare field. And I stood at the head of this bed during an open heart surgery for 7 hours, and I didn't vomit or pass out because I had been exposed to these dissections. I had done work with cadavers and anatomical specimens. And so that's one of those like weird skills that I've picked up, but I am grateful that I didn't make an embarrassment of myself in the OR. And the image on the right, talking about other skills that I've picked up, is that the Brain Bee opened up a lot of research opportunities for me at UVM. It gave me the confidence to seek out labs that I was interested in, and kind of, it was a little bit of an addition to my resume, considering what I had learned even as a high schooler. So on the right is a heat map. I could talk a lot about this map. It was in a study that I was involved in after it was published, but basically what we were looking at is how we could use small glass spheres that had a lot of holes and a lot of surface area as a means to absorb really small proteins in your blood, and the use of that being to better diagnose prostate cancer. So right now for prostate cancer, the kind of standard for diagnosis is called the PSA test. It's the prostate specific antigen, but it's pretty historically inaccurate. And if you get a positive test for it, there can be unnecessary biopsies and surgeries. So this study was really looking at how we could look at specific small proteins as an indicator of if you have prostate cancer and in what stage, and if it needs to be treated further. So those are just a couple things that I've gained from the Brain Bee, but it's really just sparked an interest. It's made me a lifelong learner about neuroscience. I always love to hear about what's happening, what's being developed in neuroscience. I had a interview for an internship this summer that got canceled, unfortunately, but it was at a biotech company, and they were working on a new drug for Alzheimer's. And so that was a really amazing thing that I could actually intelligently kind of discuss what that drug might do and a little bit of the science behind it. So just some soft skills. You never know where neuroscience is going to take you.
Aidan, thank you. And I just got a note in the chat box from Lexia that has a comment. So Lexia, I'm going to unmute you and you can make your comment or question.
So what's interesting about this for me is I did end up taking a college course through a tech center for psychology, and I actually had a brain surgery when I was 14 months old because my head was shaped like an egg, and before doctors decided to do it when I was younger, otherwise they may have had trouble doing it now as a teen with my skull being bigger. So they had to do a plastic neurosurgery on me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, Alexia, thank you for sharing that. Okay, and Aidan, are you turning it over to Trey now?
Yes, Trey can take over. Yep.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So we could go to the next slide, please. That would be great. Wonderful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few different things. I'm going to talk about first I'm going to talk about the Brain Boot Camp. And the Brain Boot Camp is a event preceding the Brain Bee by a couple weeks where we discuss some of the basics of what's going to be in the Brain Bee. So we have a speaker come in, sometimes they're a university student, and they talk for maybe an hour or an hour and a half about all these different parts of neuroscience. So there's like neuroanatomy, they talk about the neural stains, they talk about identification of different neurons. It's super, super, super interesting and super fun, and it gives an awesome foundation for what the actual Brain Bee is going to look like information-wise. So I can't recommend it enough. When is it? It's a couple weeks before the Brain Bee. And finally, why do it? Well, it's, I think, the single most helpful, apart from the Brain Bee itself, the single most helpful thing in cultivating personally my knowledge of neuroscience. Having somebody who's an expert in the field or studying to be an expert in the field to talk about something that they're passionate about with a room full of like-minded individuals, and then being able to apply that in the next coming weeks is just it's a very, very, very important experience, and I wouldn't give it up for a lot. So next slide, please. So here's my favorite part of the Brain Bee itself, and that's the case studies. So with the layout of the Brain Bee, it's the first part of the Brain Bee is split into two parts. Half of the people in the Brain Bee take a written test, and half of them go into a lab and examine actual neural specimens, which is so cool. And then they switch after like 35, 45 minutes. And after that, there's something called the case study section, where a few people who are trained in neuroscience and trained in their field go in and do a series of skits where one of them emulates symptoms of a certain condition. So like one of them might be constantly tapping their watch or clicking their fingers, or maybe one of them every few seconds has a twitch or says a random word or something like that. And then through their words and the questions that we are asking after the skit is done, it is our job to diagnose what we think they have. And it's never quite as simple as it seems, which is something I love, where it's not just, somebody who has trouble focusing. They probably don't just have ADD. You have to look a little bit deeper. Maybe they have a combination of an ADHD type disorder along with something in the schizophrenia family, or maybe they have post-traumatic stress disorder, and then as a result of that, it led to a substance abuse problem. Or there's one of them where it was someone who had just graduated college who had narcolepsy, and you had to figure out how they had narcolepsy, and they had one other condition along with the narcolepsy, and that one was just a straight out of left field. It was so interesting. But anyways, why it's important is it's an application of the theoretical knowledge that we have obtained over our year of study preparing for the Brain Bee. So you can, read a whole bunch of books, you can watch a whole bunch of videos, you can see a whole bunch of case studies, but until you actually get to work your mind and cultivate that enthusiasm and push yourself to look deeper within the mind, that's when you really take it to that next step. And having that resource is wonderful. And second, it exercises your neuroscience mind in different ways. When studying for the Brain Bee, we study in just a few different ways. It's watching videos, it's reading books and stuff. But when you can actually talk face to face with somebody who is a patient, I'm putting that in air quotes, I don't know if you could see that, but when you're talking face to face with somebody, you get to just have this completely new, rich paradigm shift. So you get to see a different and new side of neuroscience, and it's my favorite side of neuroscience. It's why I want to go into medicine as a field. And finally, it's an opportunity to see what kind of stuff you like. It took me a while to find exactly what I was interested in with neuroscience. I've always loved neuroscience, but I had to do some digging. I had to look around a little bit. First it was after I watched Grey's Anatomy and saw McDreamy, I was like, ooh, I'm gonna be a neurosurgeon. This is what I want to do. And then after digging into it a little bit, I was like, maybe not that. And then I wanted to go into like social psychology and then deal with trauma. But then once I got to actually look into like research and diagnosis of mental health conditions, like with the case studies, it's when I realized that I wanted to go into like treatment and applied medicine. So I thought that was just a funny little anecdote. Anyways, this is my last slide after this one. All right, so here is how neuroscience can help you, or at least here's how it's helped me, and I can imagine it would have a similar effect with y'all. So the first one is neuroscience has been a huge leadership opportunity. I am about as awkward as a wet rock, and not many things really come supernatural to me, but one thing that I have always just felt so magnetically attracted to is neuroscience. And I feel like that's where I'm really comfortable, and that's where I'm good to exercise myself. So after pursuing neuroscience for a few years, I ended up this year becoming elected as the president of the Neuroscience Club. So for the first time in my life, I've been able to apply oversight to a group of kids and make sure I can push that enthusiasm and joy into everybody else, and orchestrate meetings, work with fundraisers, manage finances. It's just been profoundly helpful. Another thing that is helpful for neuroscience is it's not like a lot of other subjects. Almost all the subjects are advancing at kind of a slow rate. Like math, you have a breakthrough every 20, 30 years or so. There's, L'Hospital rule and differential theoretical calculus, and that's always evolving. And then with English, the language slowly changes. But with neuroscience, it seems like every week there's just this new breakthrough that completely throws off the entire field of medicine. And it's almost like, I don't know, it's almost like sports for some people. No, that's a terrible analogy, but it's just constantly interesting. It's like not like a soap opera or a telenovela, but there's just always something new that can strike your interest, And since there's so many different subfields of neuroscience that are related to so many other fields of science, you're just getting constant bombardment of stimulation and all these new, brilliant, interesting ways that actually help people and save lives. Arguably the most important part of neuroscience, though, is knowing the difference between the thalamus and the hypothalamus. Looks really cool at parties. People love it when you go on 20-minute tangents about why the temporal lobe is more interesting than the parietal lobe. Well, kind of. Depends on what kind of parties you're at. And finally, and I swear I'm done, neuroscience has been great for meeting new people, for me at least. I got to make some of the closest friends in my life through the South Burlington High School Neuroscience Club, and having that connection to people through a shared passion is it's unreal. And I can't stress how beneficial neuroscience has been to my life. And the Brain Bee and the Brain Bee boot camp and the case studies and the testing and the specimen lab, all of those have just been sticks on the fire that's burning in my heart. And I hope that I can, share that with everybody else. Anyways, that's my shtick. I'd like to hand it over to, I believe I'm giving it back to Lisa.
Sorry, no, Trey.
I'm giving it to Kameron. Oh my bad.
Kameron,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No worries.
All right, take it away.
So I'll take it away. So this is sort of an illustration of the bio that Lauren gave at the beginning. But just to give you a little bit of perspective on where I am now and where I came from, I am originally from Heinsberg, and I participated in the first 2 Brain Bees, and I got second both years. And then I went to BU to study music as I play tuba, and also study neuroscience and work in a lab there where I was trying to integrate my interests in music and the brain. But as I got further and further into my research, I realized how little we actually know about how we hear to begin with. So how these sound waves come in our ears, and then we perceive things like beautiful signals like speech in music. And so every researcher focuses on one little tiny sliver of this question. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what my sliver is today. And I'm going to do that by way of showing you this picture of some people hiking in Vermont in the fall. And you might have had this experience yourself where you're walking in the woods and your feet are making a lot of noise. Every step is crunching leaves to the forest floor. But you might realize that after a little while, you don't hear that sound at all. And it's really out of your conscious perception. And so one question you can ask as an auditory neuroscientist is what circuits in the brain actually cancel out that sound? So you know that you're creating it. And so you can basically just cancel it out and pay attention to other sounds like a conversation you're having or some cool bird up in a tree. And so that's basically the central question of my research. But we can't study this in the human brain. As we mentioned before in the Kahoot, it's really complicated. There's 10 to 11 neurons. So instead, we study this in the mouse brain, which is slightly less complicated. there's only like around 50 million neurons instead. But we also have a lot of different tools, which I'll show you, that we can use to study specific parts of the brains and specific neural circuits, which we think are really important for behavior and would then translate back to humans. So the first thing that we do, and Theresa mentioned AI previously, so this is actually something that's really helpful for neuroscience, is that we can now use these things called deep neural networks to really quantitatively track the behavior of animals. So this horse walking or this mouse running on a wheel, for instance. So you can imagine when I'm doing my research where we're trying to look at circuits that cancel out self-generated sounds, it's really important to know where the animal's body is. And this is one tool that allows us to do that. So the second thing we can do is record the activity of neurons in the brain. And so what I'm going to show you is going to look a little bit like a constellation. But what you'll see here is the activity of like almost 100,000 neurons. So each one of these little dots is a neuron, and every flash is an action potential. So that's the basic unit of communication in the brain. And so what you can see when you look at these activity traces, so this is how each neuron is changing its activity over time. There's so much complexity to these traces. And I mean, with this is only like 100,000 neurons. We can get some insight. We know that within those signals, what the mouse is experiencing is encoded, which is pretty crazy. Third, we can use optogenetics, and optogenetics is a tool that we can actually use to control neurons. It's a more sophisticated form of the electrical stimulation that Theresa showed you. And so to do this, we can we can turn on a light that specifically activates different cells in the brain. And so this is an example of what happens when you activate cells in the hypothalamus. And what you'll see is it has a really suggestive role in a certain behavior, which you can see is aggression. So when these cells in the hypothalamus are active, it really seems like this mouse all of a sudden engages in aggression-like behaviors. So, okay, that's optogenetics. And finally, what we can do is understand the wiring diagram of the brain, how everything connects to everything else. And this is like incredibly complicated. There are so many more synapses than there are neurons, but we can trace individual neurons. And we can see, so like this red neuron, this is a mouse brain, goes for like many millimeters and actually goes all the way down to the spinal cord. So that just goes to show you sort of the fact that everything in the brain is really connected. And we have to understand all those connections to make some sense of it. But just to finally show you one example from my work, so here we recorded some neurons in auditory cortex. And again, each one of these little blips you see here is a cell, and these flashes are when they're active. And what we found with these cells is that they seem to be really active before the animal moved. And we wondered, okay, where is that coming from in the brain? And so what we decided to do is use some viruses to figure this out. And so these are good viruses as opposed to coronavirus, which allow us to map connectivity in the brain. And so these cells that I showed you over here are these purple cells right here. And these specific viruses that we used, a form of rabies virus actually, then we can use to show all the inputs that these cells are getting from throughout the brain. So that's shown in green here. So A1 is auditory cortex, where I was recording. But we also see cells as far away as the globus pallidus, which is part of the basal ganglia, which is one of like the main movement centers of the brain. So that sort of gives us some idea of why we were seeing what we were seeing. And that's just one flavor of the sorts of questions that we can ask with neuroscience. And with that, I will give it back to Lisa to chat, to take your questions and look at some resources.
And actually, I'm going to just jump in before Lisa does her final bit. Start thinking about any questions you might have for our presenters. You can put them in the chat box. While you're typing up your questions, I wanted to just launched a poll. Just answer this question quickly, and then I'm going to see what questions come in and let Lisa do her wrap up. So if you guys can, there, the poll's been launched. we'd like to just know if you learned anything by joining us today. And again, take that, any questions in the chat box or raise your hand. And I know Lisa has a couple of things she just wants to share with you before we wrap up today. Great, thank you. Did someone close the poll? Hang on, you guys, I'm gonna relaunch the poll. Somehow it closed without everybody being able to take it. So please retake it. Nobody else touch the poll, please. And again, it'd be great if you all have any questions for our presenters. I know I personally just want to say it was so exciting to see how enthusiastic you all are about this program, that I think it really comes across that this is something that, you know, more high schoolers should get involved in. It sounds like just a fantastic program. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I do see Elsa just asked, do you know if Burlington High School has a neuroscience club, and how might she find out about it?
It does.
Do you know who the contact is?
I don't, but I believe they've come to the Brain Bee before, actually.
So Lisa, you might need to unmute yourself. Lisa, do you know who the contact is?
Yes, I'm sorry. So there is no contact, no. We, Burlington High School, the winner was last year, Elena Lee. She's now a student at UVM. There is nobody now at Burlington High School. So that would be wonderful. We would love that. And Burlington Tech Center used to have a team too, and they have a new teacher. So we're hoping that they will be joining us shortly again. But we're available to help. As I'll explain when, so the poll 3, can I move that?
Yeah, you can just close it out on your screen.
Okay.
And I will say Lexia does have a question. Can I let her ask that?
Sure.
Okay, so Lexia, you're unmuted.
Well, I also have a comment as well. So not only am I, of my parents and I'm not actually the only one that's had a surgery. My mother, as a young girl, also had a shunt put in for her. And my question to all the presenters is, why neuroscience and not something like cardiology or something else?
So what is the question? Why should we be having?
Why neuroscience? Why be interested in neuroscience versus cardio or something else?
Because oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I can attempt that. So I'd say actually that let's for the sake of simplicity say that the heart is just plumbing, and it's controlled by the brain. So the brain is really the master controller of the entire body, and it's tremendously complex. There's going to be questions that we can ask about the brain for hundreds of years from now before we really fully understand it. Whereas I think the heart is actually pretty well understood, and we have a lot of precision medicine approaches to fixing the heart when it goes wrong. So I think just because of the vast universe that the brain is compared to more simple organ systems, while also really cool and obviously very vital for our lives, it just makes it that much more interesting to study.
And Delilah is asking in the chat, she's curious how competitive the Brain Bee feels. Like, how stressful is it? And what does it feel like to compete? I think that's to either Kameron, Trey, Aidan, or Theresa.
Yeah, I can answer that. I always had a blast. I always looked forward to it. I think it definitely depends on what you're looking to get out of it. I think some people might be there to win, and some people might also just be there to learn. And so, yeah, I always had a blast. I never felt like it was especially cutthroat. We all shared a common interest, and we were all there to walk away having learned something and connect with our peers. So, yeah.
Great. Well, Lisa, I'm going to give you the last minute.
Okay, great, thank you. So I've written down some neuroscience resources, and I know this page is going to always be on the there for you to look at in case you don't have a chance to write it down. But Brain Facts is what is used for all the questions that come out of here are used in the written, the practical, and the oral parts of the Brain Bee. So this is a very important text, although you can see that you can also have it online too. Another great site that I've listed is brainfacts.org, because that just has so much information that's also very current. It changes all the time. So that's a wonderful site to behold. And then the Vermont Brain Bee website, that is something that has all the information about past brain bees, about how to prepare. There are a great study guide that goes through all the chapters and has videos for each, and we have extra videos for different topics. And it has a page to register. So, and then finally, the International Youth Neuroscience Association, which is like 4 years old, but it's this great site. And if we can go to the next slide, I just got this sent to me because they're offering a summer course, and it's free, and it's on introductory neuroscience, and they have a bunch of neuroscientists that are spending time lecturing. You know, one from, I noticed the list from Stanford, from Harvard, actually, I don't remember the name, but there are several, and you have till the 14th to register. And so that might be really worthwhile to look into. Yeah, so, and back to the, can you bring me back? Thanks. Yeah, so here's this page if you wanted to write any of these things down. And I was going to put in the chat box too, and I can do that right now. But if you had any questions about the Brain Bee, and if you want to receive like other emails of the people who were partnered with me today, I can get that to you also. But it's simple. It's Vermont Brain Bee @gmail.com.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody. So hopefully you all heard that. Vermont, spelled out, Vermont Brain Bee @gmail.com. That is how you can connect with Lisa. If you have further questions about the Brain Bee, it really sounds like a fascinating program to be involved in. I think that course that Lisa just mentioned, anyone who's thinking of getting ahead in neuroscience, that might be a fun thing to do over the summer. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. As I mentioned in the beginning, today was our last quarantine time session. We are taking a hiatus over the summer. But for those of you looking for stuff to do, I put in the chat box earlier, we are continuing with our science cafes over the summer. There is actually one on July 29th that is related to the brain, but you might find some of the other topics interesting as well. You can get all of that information on the website, the UVM, uvm.edu/extension/youth/announcements. That's where we put our stuff. Join us tomorrow at the cafe on neuroscience and your brain's nightlife. But with that, I want to thank our presenters for their just wonderful job explaining this program and sharing what you've done and your enthusiasm. And thank everybody for taking the time out of your day to learn a little bit. So with that, I will hopefully see you all at another program. So thank you.